Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is James, continuing on with this Balsa USA Smoothie build. Thanks for tagging along with me as I build this thing. And so in this video, I'm going to be working on this nose section of the airplane, building this area up. Now, what I need to do is, here is where we left off last time. I want to trim this block off. This is basically the hatch that I installed last time. I'm going to trim this block off and then install, there's some doublers that go, move this out of the way, some doublers that go right in here in the engine compartment. And then there's a block that goes on the bottom here. That's this piece right here. And then I'm going to mount the engine block. I mean the engine mount. I'm sorry. Going to mount the engine mount. I'm trying to say. It's going to go right in here. I'm going to be mounted inverted. So let me grab my engine here. This is the OS 46 AX2, and it's going to be upside down or inverted in here, you know, like this. Alright, so if you've been kind of following along in this build, you may remember in the beginning when I was setting up the bulkheads and the firewall, I had to move the firewall back because I had to accommodate the engine mount, which is again going to be right here, and the engine itself. So I had to move the firewall back, and that was in the instructions to do so if you needed to do that. Well, by doing that, these doublers that go right in here are actually going to be a little bit too short now. Okay, if I do this, as you can see there. So to make up for that, I have a piece of stock balsa. This is 1/4 inch. I think it's probably about a 1/2 inch wide or so. Stock balsa that I'm going to put in here to make up for that space. So if I flip this guy over, these guys are going to go like this, that. Oops, let me put this over here. And then I'm going to cut 2 little pieces and trim them to fit in here, because I don't want to leave a little gap. The doublers do a couple things. They're going to strengthen up the engine compartment. They're going to strengthen up the nose of the airplane. And they also thicken it up so that you can kind of make this curve when I'm trying to shape the nose. Now, I'm not shaping any of the plane yet until I get the engine mounted, because it's going to be the spinner is going to control the geometry right at the nose of the airplane up here. So I can't attach the spinner until the engine's mounted, and then at that point I can then start shaping the airplane. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. I'm just going to be trying to get the engine mount attached and get these blocks in place, and we'll see how far along I can get. Okay, so I'm going to just trace this tip of this block parallel to the ends of these side panels here. Then I'll take it off and I'll cut it. Square, my friend the square. There. Okay. Hopefully this is somewhat straight. Okay, that just gives me a guide. So let me take this off of here. I'll take this hatch off and I'll trim it back, and then I'll move on to the doublers. All right, so one thing I'd like to mention is that I am getting a lot of really good comments. I'm getting a lot of, not only am I getting people maybe asking me some questions for some tips or advice that I have, but I'm also getting a lot of tips and comments for me. People are making comments about different methods of doing things, also about different tools and things like that. So there's a lot of nice comments that I appreciate. So I'm kind of learning along the way also. You know, I kind of look at this channel that I'm doing here. It's kind of similar to kind of being out in the field, being out the RC field. You know, when I'm out there, I kind of consider myself sort of like a average kind of guy with my experience. And you know, I meet people of all types out there, and some people have less experience, and they may ask me a question and I can give them a couple of tips. But there's also a lot of people out there who have lots of experience, more than I do, and have been doing this for a really long time, and I get help from them. So I kind of look at doing, you know, kind of doing this channel sort of the same way, and that's sort of my intention here. I'm really enjoying doing this, and I just hope that it's interesting and useful, and maybe some people are getting some stuff out of it, and also I'm learning myself, so it's been really fun. All right, so let me go ahead and get this thing cut, and then we can move on to those doublers. All right, so I have this kind of old rickety miter box. It's kind of worn out, but I'm going to use it. I'll put my block on here. And I have a couple different saws. I like this one because it has a nice kind of flat, wide blade. Unfortunately, it's not deep enough to get to the bottom of the miter here. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my little coping saw. And let's see here. I'm going to give myself a little bit. I'm just going to cut a little bit on the outside of my line so I have a little bit of room to play with when I get to the carving and stuff. I'll come back and sand it off. Somewhere about there. The problem with a plastic miter box is you can kind of cut into it. Oh well. Okay, so that worked out okay. We got our block kind of trimmed. And we'll come back later on and work with that. All right, so let me go ahead and get this stuff out of the way, and we'll start working on these doublers. I wanted to point out that I already drew the center line of the engine mount on the firewall. It's kind of hard to see with this angle. You kind of see it forms this cross in there. And I did that because that's what's going to be the guide when I put the engine mount on. So let me show you what that is. So the center line of the engine is 1 1/8 inch down from the top of this side fuselage panel. So that's 1 1/8 inch down from there. Let me get my pencil. Okay, I got my pencil. And so obviously you can kind of see the center line is going to be the center of the spinner. I'll just draw it on here though. So it's about 1 1/8 below. Somewhere like right about here. Here-ish. And it's right there. Like that. And then of course the center line looking down is already on the plan. It's this one that I highlighted here. And this little guy off to the side here, that's my right, that's the offset to the right for the engine thrust direction. So we'll come back to this later, but this is basically the offset to the right that I have to kind of build into, or have to, when I put the mount onto the firewall. I'll have to angle it off a little bit like that, but that's a little bit later here. So there's the center line there, and then there's a center line here. And then all I did was just measure those, and then I just marked them out right here on the firewall. You can kind of see it in there. Just wanted to show you that. Okay, let's get to these doublers. I'm going to put my parchment paper down to protect my plans. My plans are getting a little beat up here. So I'm going to sand a little. I'm going to sand this this corner off of both of these, this inside corner, because I know when I put this, well, you can kind of see it when I put the firewall on. So, you know, some of the glue sort of squeezed out, and there's like a little bit of glue in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and sand off the corner on these, or this edge, just so that I can kind of get this straight up against the firewall. Just like that. Nothing, I don't have that much glue in there, but I know I have a little bit. Yeah, so that will sit in here like this. Okay. This one and this one. Okay. Down this one like this. Okay, so I'm going to put this one on first. And before I glue it, though, I can go a little bit past it and trim it. I'm just going to mark kind of approximately where my glue line is. So I'm going to paint glue all along this entire surface. I want to get it everywhere because, as I mentioned, as I sand this down, this front part of the side fuselage panel is going to be removed, and I don't want to have any gaps in the glue. I want the glue to be nice. I want the glue contact to be across the entire former, or doubler I should say. So that's this one. And then this guy, okay, keep this one here and this one here. Tell you what, I've been using a lot more of this Titebond in this build than I have in my last build. I'm growing to like it a lot more for some of the applications. This one, it's important because you can't use really a CA down in the middle here because you won't be able to get this on quick enough. I mean, you can use one of the slower curing CAs, the thick CAs, but I don't want to mess with it. So I'm just going to paint this on here. Probably got a little too much on there. In fact, I know I've got too much. Let me get something. Wipe this off. That's probably a lot. Oh well. And I can tell that my firewall is a little bit off because I got this guy sticking out over here. It's okay. And I'll clamp it. Just put it on a little bit light right now, and then I'll clamp it down once I get it lined up here. All I don't have to go crazy tight on it. I don't want to dent my wood. I could have put another piece of scrap balsa like I've done before to kind of keep the clamps from digging into the wood, but I'll just try to be careful. Okay. Don't want to get too much glue. Don't want to get too much glue kind of squirting out and forming a kind of a hard spot. I want to be able to trim this nicely. In fact, I'm just going to pull this off of here. Okay, there's one. I'm going to do the other side now. All right, so there we go. I checked it, and so I got these doublers in here. Let me move this back. And now I'm going to put these, I'm going to cut a couple pieces of this to stick right here on the edges, or in the front here, I should say. Okay, well, since I'm using scrap, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it sort of on the fat side, and I'll come back and trim it back. Once it's glued on there, let's put it right, somewhere right about there is good. Okay, let this sit for a little while. Actually, I let this sit for 2 days almost. Finally got back to this. A couple things came up. Got me distracted again. So let me go ahead and pull off all these clamps and we'll take a look at our formers. Let me move these clamps out of the way. Right, there we go. Of course, I'm going to trim these. All right, so now I want to talk about this right here. If you look at this closely here, I don't know how my light is. If you look at this closely, you can see how this doubler actually got angled up a little bit. Kind of see that right in there. Well, what happened, I was looking at this, and what happened is I had to move the firewall back in order to make room for the engine. Remember, if you saw some of those earlier video when I was working on this. So in order to move the firewall back, I had to trim these plywood doublers that are in here. And when I trimmed those plywood doublers, I sandwiched them together, kind of clamped them together or taped them or something, and then I tried to cut, the end of them off. Well, when I did that, I must have cut it at a slight angle. Actually, I did cut it at a slight angle because I was checking it with my square here. And if I put this up against it here, hopefully you can kind of see. You may not be able to see right inside here or not, but there's a little gap, and it's not quite a 1/16 of an inch gap in there. And what that means is, because I cut them together again, what that means is when I butted up this firewall up against those plywood doublers, I put a little bit of a, well, basically it tilts back just a little bit. And because it tilts back just a little bit, these balsa doublers that I kind of put up against it, they kind of tilt back a little bit also. So that's why it's kind of sticking out. Now, is that a problem? Overall, I don't think it's a big problem. You know, ideally, the firewall would have been perpendicular, you know, with the top of this fuselage side. But what I'm going to do is, because I don't want to have the engine sort of tilted upwards at all. Okay, so I don't think that this is a big problem. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just trim this excess material off, and I want to attach my engine mount. So I'm going to get the engine mount in here and mark the locations for the holes and get those drilled out and in the right location. And then when I do the final attachment of the engine mount, I'm going to have to do some shimming anyhow. I'm going to be using some washers and going to be putting some shims on the left side of the engine mount so I get a little bit of an angle to the right. And that is per the instructions, to put a little bit of the thrust angle of the engine offset to the right a little bit. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in more detail. But I can also, at that time, if I need to, I can also use washers to sort of shim the engine mount if it's too far out of vertical, which I don't think it's going to be that bad. I can again use the washers or some other method to sort of shim it a little bit more vertical. So I'll address that once I get the holes drilled and get the engine mount sort of to where I want it to be, and then we'll come back and we'll use the shims, the washer shims, to sort of set the thrust angle and also check that vertical if I need to do that. Okay. Okay, well there we go. There's our nice doublers in here. So the next step is going to be to line up the engine mount in here. Now one thing I noticed is that this thing, when I have it set right, it fits in here just perfectly. But I'm going to have a little bit of an issue with this because, as I mentioned before, there's a little bit of right, about a couple of degrees of the engine thrust line is to the right a little bit. And if I put this over here, what's going to happen is when I put this engine mount, it's going to be upside down. When I put this engine mount in here like this, I don't have a lot of room to put that angle in it. So I'm probably going to have to sand a little bit of this side out a little bit so I can kind of get this thing to fit in here. I'm exaggerating it, but it's going to be in there like this. So this rail is going to be kind of up against this doubler in there. So I just need to make sure that I can get that angle in there. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I already put on the center line on the firewall. I put the center line for the engine based on the plan. So here's my vertical center line, and then here's the horizontal center line, which again is 1 1/8 from the top here. So the next step is to find the right location for the engine mount. Okay, so this is a Great Plains engine mount, and it's adjustable 40 to 60. It's kind of this composite plastic material. So I like these a lot, and they just sort of snap together. And then of course they can adjust in and out to fit the engine. So what I want to do is I want to mark on here the center line, the horizontal center line for the engine, and then of course the center line of the mount. Once I get it adjusted to the right width, I want to get that center line for the vertical location, or the vertical line. I want to get it marked on here. So then I can just kind of use those lines and those marks to line it up with these guys in here, and then I can hold it down, and then I'll drill out the holes to actually attach it onto the firewall. Okay, so let me get the plane out of the way. All right, so one thing I'm going to do is I like to take, even though I'm going to have to cut the nose area out in certain areas so that I can accommodate the needle valve and the carburetor and such, I like to pull the carburetor off when I'm doing this, kind of get it out of the way, and it makes it a little bit easier. At least for me, I find it a little bit easier to work with. So I'm going to pull this carburetor off of here, and we can put it back later. When I get to the final steps of putting the engine on, I'll put it back in, obviously. So I'll put that over here, and I'll put these screws in here so I don't lose them. Oh, I can't do that. I'll put the screws in here so I don't lose them. Okay, so here's the engine. So I have a piece of paper towel in here, and I need to get another little something to stick in the, I don't want any dust, sawdust or anything getting inside the engine. So I'm just going to go ahead and make like a little plug I can stick in here while I'm working on it. Okay. All right, so like a lot of engines, the OS Max or the OS engines, the center line, basically the center of the prop shaft, is just like that, and it's right along the bottom or the base of this mounting beam or this mounting tab. So that's the center line right there of the engine, the horizontal center line. And since it's going to sit on top of the mount like so, right here, obviously that means that this is the center line of the mount, the horizontal center line. Now they do give you a little mark on here, as you can kind of see it there, but they don't do it on this side. And then the other problem that I have is that because when I put this in here, this is just the way this one came out, but when I put this in here, I'm not going to be able to see that mark, obviously where those doublers are. So I'm going to transfer the mark on the inside of the mount so that I can kind of get it lined up on this guy right here. All right, I think I just said that this was a 40 to 60. It's actually a 40 to 70 size engine mount. Okay, I'm going to pull this apart, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some tape, because I can't really mark it on here very easily because it's dark. So I'm going to get some tape, and I'm just going to cut a couple little pieces of tape that I can put right in here. I'll go on the inside so I can draw this line across there. So let me do another one. This guy's out of the way. And I got one more here. right about like that. And now carefully, I got this skinny little scale here. Carefully want to line that up parallel with the rail, top of the rail, like that, and mark this right here. Okay. And then this one also, right about there. Okay, so those are the two horizontals. And now I can kind of see them in there. All right, so now I got to do the vertical center line. Okay, so for the vertical center line, I need to be careful because I have to have the engine mounted in here. I think it's close to being closed all the way, but I'm going to just carefully put the engine in and really snug it down. I don't want the engine to be loose in there because otherwise it's going to be hard to make sure that it's lined up in the right location. So I want to make sure that it's nicely seated on the engine mount. And then I'm going to clamp it on here. Do that one. And do that one. Okay, so now I've got the engine mount kind of adjusted in the right to the right width. I don't like the way that one is. Okay. And now I can mark the line on here next. All right, and as with the other ones, I'm going to cut some small strips of tape here. Go like this. Oops, I'm off my camera. Sorry. I'm just going to put it right, let's see. Put it like right here. Just like that. Should be close to the center. And I want to be careful. I don't want to get this. I want to make sure that I don't move the engine. Okay, like that. And now this one's going to come off later, so it doesn't matter. Just going to do that. And for good measure, I'll put one at the bottom here, like this. The only reason I'm doing this is because this is how I'm going to transfer the line between the two sides. So I need to get my square. Okay, I got the square. Now carefully, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try to measure. Okay, so I'm going to use so I'm about 2 inches, 2¼ inches. So I'm going to go, so don't look at these numbers. I got 1, 2¼ Okay. That means I'm going to be at 1 1/8 in. So 1 1/8 would be right there. Right about there. I'll mark it in a few spots. My pen is, here we go, right about there. something about there. And then carefully hopefully let me mark a couple more, make sure. So again, what I like to do is I'm doing something like this. I mark several little dots, and I'm hoping that on average they'll sort of all line up when I draw a line on there. Okay, right here. That. Yeah, that one was off right there. Okay. So hopefully my line is something like that. And then I can mark it here. Okay. And down here. All right. Okay, now I'm going to carefully pull off this tape, this wider ones, just like that. Now again, I don't want my engine to move, so I'm going to be really careful. So now I have another step I have to do here before we can drill out and mark it on here. All right, so I'm going to be using these 10 by 24 bolts to mount the engine. But unfortunately, they're a little bit too big for these holes that come with the mount. So I'm going to drill out all 4 of those holes first. And then I'm going to be mounting them with, attaching them to the firewall with these blind nuts, or these T-nuts. So what I want to do is I need to drill this out. So I need a 3/16 inch drill bit. And I'm going to drill out these 4 holes carefully. And then I can go ahead and set it up so I can mark the locations on the firewall. I mentioned actually in an earlier video that I wanted to get myself sort of a mid-sized drill, because I had a big sort of like normal size standard drill, electric one with the cord, which is too beefy. Then I had that small roto tool. So I went online and I looked around and I got this Black & Decker. It's a rechargeable, and it's sort of it's not super powerful, but I think it's actually a really good size for this kind of stuff. We're working on RC planes because it's not too big and bulky, and I can get pretty good control with it. So I'm going to try this out. Hopefully it works for me. I carefully want to drill these holes out. I don't want to drill into the engine, but I need to be careful. But I'm going to put a couple clamps, more clamps on the mount if I can. There we go. Good, that'll hold it together. Okay, so I'm carefully going to try to drill these out without damaging anything. Hold on a second. So I'll have to admit that I started drilling this, I started videoing the drilling, trying to get it done with the engine mounted on and all the clamps, and it actually just became too cumbersome. And this is still just even though I had it clamped, this was coming apart. So I took the engine off and I clamped it really well all around, and I drilled each one of these holes out with a 3/16 inch bit and just took my time. So I ended up doing that off camera, and it worked out good, but I think it just got to be really hard to do, just kind of holding it like that. So anyhow, so those are the 4 mounting bolts now. And now I can go ahead and mark these. I can mark the location of the holes now. Once I get this thing in here, let me see if I can pull these guys out of here. I can mark the location of the engine mount using my little tape marks, and then I can mark the holes. And I know that as I measured it before, I know that I was 2 1/4 inches wide. And all I got to do is just kind of set it up again. I was trying to keep everything kind of from taking it apart, but I ended up doing it anyhow. All All right, so those are my marks. So we'll move on here. So let's see if this is okay here. I obviously checked it, and I'm going to show you. Let's go ahead and put, so this is the bottom of the airplane here, and I'm going to do this inverted again. The engine's going to be mounted in inverted. I'll just slide this on here and here, and we take a look at it. Hopefully you can kind of see, oops, right about here. Okay. And then there's their line over there on that side. There's the line down in the bottom, or on the inside, I should say. I'll flip it around here. And there's our line on the top.